My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence.
Today I'm speaking with Julian Chapman. He has over 3 decades of experience engaging teams and organizations, from small groups to thousands of employees, building their leadership capabilities. His leadership knowledge is augmented by his 30 plus years. One of his dual careers was that of a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, from which he retired in 2014 at the rank of Brigadier-General. He joined Forrest Company in 2002, taking over as the president of the company in 2015. So extensive experience as an executive and as a high-ranking military officer. Known as a pioneer of thinking in the workplace, Julian is a master trainer in effective intelligence, and that is a trademark term, which he brings to organizations through keynote addresses or assisting individuals and teams in solving problems through effective thinking. His thoughts on leadership, organizational development, and accountability have been published in Human Resources Reporter magazine, CPA Bottom Line Newspaper, and HR Professional magazine. In his spare time, Julian is a member of the board of directors of the Wounded Warriors Project, a charitable foundation that provides support for veterans, focusing on those suffering from PTSD. He co-founded a charitable foundation for the Canadian Rangers of Northern Ontario that primarily supports at-risk Aboriginal youth. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto and is a graduate of the Canadian Army Command and Staff College and the Canadian Forces College, and an alumnus of the U.S. Army War College. Julian, thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with me. I want to talk about your book and talk about your career, and talk about your life. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave. I really appreciate this opportunity, and it should be an interesting journey in and of itself, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I like to always start off the interviews by getting a sense of the guest's background and early life. So let's start off with where you were born and raised, and what life was like for you growing up.
Well, it's I don't usually talk about this, so I'm a little bashful on this because it's not something that that one gets an opportunity to talk about very often. So I grew up in sort of northeaster of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, in a small communities, farming communities, that sort of thing. I have no siblings. My mother was born in Scotland, and my father is a Torontonian. But my mother passed away when I was 7 years old, and my dad didn't know what on earth to do with me, and so he would send me off to family and friends, and then or keep me working as hard as he could to keep things going. His career was, he was a filmmaker, and he won an Academy Award in 1968. So he was quite a famous filmmaker, but his film career kind of took a nosedive after the passing of my mother. But he tried all sorts of things and was very active in all sorts of innovative projects. So I guess that's a very long-winded way of explaining that I grew up as sort of an independent kind of kid, and much to the chagrin of my father, I had this interest in military history. As you can probably see, well, behind me, I've got all sorts of the volumes that my wife throws, tells me I can't have back in the house, so they're here in my office at work. and that led me to an interest in the military. And so as a young 17-year-old, I joined up as a private soldier for a summer job. The Canadian Forces has a system of where they take on kids and enroll them in the Canadian Forces, and I just stayed. I never managed to escape, so I was a joiner for life, or for 34 years at any rate. So that's kind of the backdrop, I suppose, from that standpoint. And I think my early days as a young private soldier, uh, I looked at the leadership around me, and I think in my arrogance of youth, I sort of thought, hey, I can do better than that. So I decided after a few years of being in the ranks, being a private and a corporal, I would apply for my commission to become an officer. Boy, did I learn a lot along the way. Most notably that I made all the mistakes in the book all the way along. So it was the school of hard knocks as one moves up. So that started me on the path of leadership development, and as I like to refer to it, the journey of leadership development. So
I had a conversation with an individual. It was very early on when I first started this podcast, and he and I talked about the Canadian Armed Forces. He was a member of the Sea Cadets. I was a member of the Sea Cadets here in the United States, and was involved with the foreign exchange program with the Canadian Armed Forces and the United States Navy, where I ended up going to Nova Scotia and being on that base for a couple of weeks. And I guess a bunch of your cadets came down to Florida and enjoyed the summer heat down here. But yeah, it was that was an interesting experience. And I thought it was pretty interesting that a lot of the cadets that were my age were planning their full enlistment, and they were actually getting paid, I believe. Do they get paid at 16, 17 years old?
Well, certainly 17 is when you sort of transition into the forces writ large from the cadets. I didn't manage to do the cadet program because where I was living in a farming community and on a farm. So there wasn't any cadets nearby. I had to travel 60 miles a night to go and parade with my unit, kind of thing, in order to serve. But yes, once you join, you do get paid, and I think they do pay the cadets in the summer. The summer cadets, they pay them a certain stipend over the summer. So you would have been in Cornwallis likely, and
Yes, exactly.
I lived for 2 years down the road from there, working in a peacekeeping training center over the years. So I know that corner of the world quite well. So
you mentioned you made a lot of the mistakes along the way, and I mean, I think anybody that's really developed as a leader, looking back, can view a lot of their decisions and their leadership faux pas and go, man, if I had only known, but for those young leaders that might be listening, what are some of the lessons that you learned early on that could possibly help these individuals?
Well, I mean, I think there's a multitude of lessons of the mistakes that I've made, and hopefully I actually learned from some of them rather than just making the mistake and then repeating it several times over. That's probably the biggest one, is when you make a mistake, you make a mistake. Perfectionism is the sure route to unhappiness, and we can't get it perfect. And particularly when you deal with human beings, the way human beings are and the nature of human beings is that you can't get it perfect. And so don't try to get it perfect. And that certainly was one of the mistakes that I made as a young junior officer in particular. I thought I had to be perfect at everything, and the fastest runner and the strongest guy and the best shot and all these sort of things. So understanding what your strengths and limitations are. What I refer to that as authentic leadership, having a true sense of oneself and how one sort of fits in. I'm reminded a lot of the phrase, and it certainly happened to me in the twilight of my military career. Of I would go to events like the baseball game of the Blue Jays and be the guy who stands out there on the mound, and everybody pays huge, is clapping and cheering and standing up and all that sort of nonsense. And that old adage from the Roman Empire, where the slave would stand behind the emperor, and the emperor would receive all this adulation from the crowd, and the role of the slave was to whisper in his ear, "Remember, thou art mortal," and that not to allow your hubris and your arrogance and all of those things to get away from you, to recognize that you have a most sacrosanct and sacred bond between the leader and the led, and never to get too far ahead of yourself and too heady in your perspective on things. And so I guess from the standpoint of being authentic, the other part is to be servant. And lots of people have written about servant leadership, and often they include the two of them. The idea that their success is your success is most important. Yeah. And that it's about bringing them along, and that you're only as good as your last man or woman, as we say. When you take that platoon out for a run, or you're doing presentations to the executive in your civilian career, you're only as good as what you put the team out there to do. And you can't go and say, well, it was because of them. It's because of me. I haven't built them, and I haven't grown them, and I have not transformed them. And so I suppose the third element of beyond authentic servant is transformational. Recognize that nobody comes perfectly formed. There is no such thing as the perfect direct report out there. I try to tell this to my clients all the time, that the perfect employee is not there. You have to build them. You have to transform them. And that means you have to engage with them, and you have to truly lead them. So being authentic, being servant, and being transformational, I think are kind of the three foundations that every leader needs to understand. But I would say that the other part is that one of the things I learned along the way is that we tend to denigrate management. Say it's all about leadership. And the two actually go hand in glove. They go hand in hand, management and leadership. And so you can't be great in your role if you're not a good manager and also a good leader. And recognize that management and leadership represent the tension between task and people. So the management function is very much a task function. The leadership function is very much a people function. And to be truly effective, you have to bring those two things together. So now I'm just spouting. So,
well, it's interesting that you started along that path. The title of your book, the Managerial Leadership Journey, is one of the topics that I want to dive into, is how you combine them to get a synergistic effect, essentially. But there was one of the things that you said, that transformational leadership. You alluded to it, but I wanted to highlight it, that many times young leaders, and I know that I was like this as a young fire officer, having this zero defects mentality, like you're expecting your people to know everything and deliver when you ask them to do something, or you give them an order to get this done. and when they don't deliver exactly how you imagined it, um, holding them accountable for something that you actually failed to do by really developing them so that they could deliver what you were asking of them,
It's very true, and we we distinguish accountability and responsibility as two different things. And this may be a bit of a long-winded way to lead into this, but responsibility is a personal feeling of obligation, and accountability is the component of the relationship between the manager and the direct report. So I feel responsible is really important in organizations, but what's equally important, and if not more important, is the notion of accountability and that relationship between the manager and the direct report, or the leader and the led. And all too often we rely purely on people's sense of responsibility. And so we get really angry when they don't do it right. But in accountability, I turn around and I look at it and go, what did I do wrong that set the conditions for that individual to not be as successful as I'd hoped they'd be? And it's really about turning that around and re-describing it in such a way to understand that it's actually me, not them. And so you hit the nail on the head, and you appreciate that, coming from the fire service, right? I mean, it's accountability is critical. Everybody's got to know their job. You can't have people running around doing other people's jobs in a fire.
Yeah. The Forrest Company, the company that you are the president of. I would like to hear maybe some of the journey along the way, from starting there and then taking over as the president, and then maybe go into what effective intelligence is, and how you use that in your organization.
Yeah, so just as part of my journey with Forrest Company, I came to Forrest Company, and I'd done a lot of leadership development over the years, but I sort of started at the lower levels, and I think one of the things that we found in Forrest Company is that you can do a great job of pumping sunshine into people and getting them ready to go and go out and lead. And in reality, the issues that happen in organizations is that you can spend all that time preparing the leaders, but if you don't look at the systemic issues inside the organization, what ends up happening is those leaders run smack into a wall. They run into a wall where the systems, the culture, the lack of strategy, the lack of structure, all of these sort of things get in the way of them being truly great leaders. You can only go so far as a great leader as you're, as standing around in a crumbling house, right? And it's just, there's no way you can survive that. So the journey of myself and Forrest Company has been that move from leadership development, which was training initially, to facilitating teams, to coaching people, to now much more consulting. And since we took over Forrest Company in 2015, most of my energy goes to the C-suite and consulting around how do you set the strategy, define the structure, and then enable the leaders to then deliver on the strategy by leading their people in a sound house, in a house that is well designed and has all the right walls and all the girders and the roof and all of those sort of things to really enable the organization to flourish. As I like to say, our job is to create great places where people can work that also deliver the strategy. And that great places for people to work is that people side, and the strategy is the task side. So again, it's that tension between management and leadership. So that's the travels of and the journey of Forrest Company has been into that realm, and so I've written a bit about that in the book, the nature of that, and it's very important now in the post-COVID era. So how are we going to set ourselves up in the post-COVID era, whenever that post-COVID era is? Actually, I guess I'm implying that we're in it, but you never know from day to day. So that's been our journey. But what has interested me, and I about it's over 20 years ago, I was introduced to this thing called effective intelligence, which is how do you think through the work that you have. So we all make decisions all day long, but very few people have actually been taught how to make a decision. And that has an impact, because if you don't have a framework for how you make your decisions, you may lack confidence in your decisions. If you can't then explain to your boss how you made the decision, then your boss lacks confidence in the decisions because they can't see it. Think back to grade 11 mathematics. You never got the full marks for coming up with the answer. You had to show your work.
Right.
So explaining to people how to think through these things is critical. So we spend a lot of time working with our clients around their thinking and providing them with frameworks for how to make a decision. And decisions are different than planning, just as strategy is different from planning, just as creativity is different from innovation. So these are all the elements of what we work with our clients on, which is how do you think through this, either as an individual or as a team. So that kind of supercharges the house by getting good thinking, good solid thinking going on inside the house for the organization and for the betterment of everyone. So that's the effective intelligence side of, or the effective thinking side that we focus on.
And do you talk about that in your book, The Managerial Leadership Journey?
I do, and I talk about the importance of thinking, because after all, our paychecks are actually for our thinking. Very few of us are doing things with our hands in this day and age, right? We're not. It's about how do I use my whole self in order to do something, and the vast majority of our paycheck is for that. Yet we don't focus on how we think. We don't teach people how to think. We go to school; it doesn't teach us how to think. It teaches us what to think.
Yeah.
And so that's another journey. It's probably volume 2 of it's the next book, is a lot more into the thinking realm, but it's critical. And at the highest level of the organization all the way down are different levels of thinking that are required, and different levels of complexity of thinking. So that's all tied into the book as well, and understanding the nature of levels of work and the nature of how do you stratify an organization.
Yeah, you've mentioned strategy a couple of times. How do you work with an organization? Well, is part of your role to help them develop a strategy?
Well, what we term it or help them to articulate their strategy. Because in a lot of cases, the organization actually knows what they want to be when they grow up. They've just never really articulated it. And so we help them to articulate, whether it's vision, mission, values, the standard ones, what are the strategic drivers of their business, what is their unique selling proposition, what is their unique sustainable competitive advantage in the market, what is their core objectives, what is the organizational spine. All of these things are part of strategy decisions. And what we try to do is we try to delineate strategy, because you use the term strategy and you ask two people, what do they mean by strategy? And you get 2 different answers, maybe even 3 different answers, actually. So with us, strategy is very much about what do we want to be, as opposed to the process to get somewhere. Because organizations are often not clear on what they want to be. They spend time doing strategic planning, which is moving from where we are now to where we're going to go, but they never have that end state, or they often don't have that end state. And they spend too much time, and not to decry consultants, because after all, I am one. But they spend too much time creating these, these magnificent things that sit on the wall. Nobody pays any attention to them after they've been done, and they don't live the strategy at all. And so it's about how do you integrate that strategy into the day-to-day for the organization to be what it wants to be. And so that's the kind of work that we do. But it's about that articulation. So as part of the thinking, as part of this effective intelligence, it's about asking the right questions to unlock the answers to what the strategy of the organization needs to be. So we don't do what many of the strategy firms do, which is gathering all sorts of data and comparing them against this company or that company. It's about what does the organization really want to be. And sometimes that means you got to bring in the board, you've got to bring in the owners, depending on the nature of ownership of the business. But you have to have that conversation about what do we really want to be. And ironically enough, it's the same for each and every one of us too. We have to decide what we want to be. Far too often we go through our lives without clarity of what we want to be. I always wanted to be an astronaut. I learned very quickly that I didn't have any head for mathematics. Hence why I'm not even in financial institutions, right? So I had to give up on that one. But really being clear on what we want to be is a critical thing for each and every one of us to be able to fulfill the life that we want to lead. And we often don't do that.
The book behind me, I talk about that very thing in there. It's really interesting that we're having this conversation because I talk about strategy. I was highly motivated to learn as much about strategy as possible. Like when I left the fire service in 2019, and I had come across the Grand Strategy program at Yale, and I started reading about that. There's, I don't know, I want to say there's 3 or 4 books on it that are pretty well written, and it's typically a program that future world leaders, or even there's officers in the armed forces that will take time to go and spend in this program. I want to say it's a year-long program, and what it does is it develops these young leaders to have big picture thinking, and they read all the greats, the Art of War, On War by Clausewitz, The Prince by Machiavelli, and it was interesting. It was a lot of the same books that I want to say is on the reading list at the Army War College.
Right, for sure.
But I got really interested in it and thought you could apply those same principles to your life, and tried to come up with a formula that would be easy enough to explain and walk somebody through and put it in the book. It's
Okay.
But I want to dig in more to your book and really what motivated you to write your book?
That's a great question, Dave. And I think there are 3 things. There are 3 core elements to me in the book, and that is, one is that the need for a profession of managerial leadership, and the profession of arms in the military. We have accountants, we have this, we have that. Yet the one common role throughout is managerial leadership, and it's often done on the side of our desk. I want to go back to being this accountant, this great accountant, or this great HR person or operations person. I'm not really interested. Oh gosh, I've got to deal with these people and I got to do this. I'd much rather just count beans or spreadsheets or whatever, right? So really getting to a point where there is this profession and thinking of it as a profession, because the impact that you're having on people's lives every day is huge. We don't understand the impact that we have as leaders on our people. And so it's absolutely critical to think in terms of this is a profession. And another element to that is that so the other piece and what I've tried to bring out in the book is the critical role that the managers of managers play, or leaders of leaders. So many of the books on leadership and on management talk about leading your team or managing your team. But we don't talk about how different it is to manage managers, to lead leaders, and what are the things that you have to do there, and what are the things you have to look out to and look out for. And so those were the two things that I really wanted to drive home. And back to what we talked about at the very beginning, that it is actually a journey. And so it's that journey of the profession, but I need someone to help me on that journey, and that's my manager helps me on that journey. I mean, it's great to have, executive coaches. I don't want to cut my nose to spite my face here, but you need your boss to help you through that. And the managers of managers out there don't see that as their role. So this now sort of they sort of tumble back together again, and that this is a journey, and that it's not an inoculation and you're good to go kind of thing. You have to keep building on this and learning as you go. So that was the intent behind the book. It's a compendium of the work that we've done here at Forrest Company for 30 plus years, in leading leaders in all sorts of different industries and all sorts of different backgrounds, all sorts of different nations. But it's really, that's the core of it. Experiences with clients, because in Canada, we have a very different view of the military than you have in the US. And so for a long time, I never talked about my military background. I never talked about my military experiences. And so this is kind of opening it up, and that's how I've integrated the two stories a bit. But it's the same issues. It's all about human beings and how we deal with human beings, and how we work with human beings, and how we get them to get the task and the people together. So I'm sort of bringing this to the forefront now, whereas before one kept it kind of hidden and you didn't talk about it and that sort of thing. So that's the other part.
Can you explain that to me? I mean, because I was not aware of that.
It's it's been an interesting experience, and part of it is because we don't have the same martial perspective. We have a very, very small force. Very few people have served. Now, the war in Afghanistan, our longest conflict ever, has produced a new round of veterans. But by and large, most Canadians don't have any experience with the military. In fact, their ideas of the military are based on Hollywood movies and those sort of things. So that's their attitude and their perspective. And so understanding how the profession of arms has looked at leadership is something that's completely foreign to Canadians. So that was the sort of the intent behind it all, and so much of what has happened, just in the last 10, 15 years, around the nature of conflict in Afghanistan, brought it to the forefront, and of course we're reliving it now with the war in Ukraine. And just understanding the nature of human beings and humanity has changed things, and I think COVID as well, while it gave leaders an opportunity to be better leaders, I would hope that will continue, because they really had to focus there. But I also think that there's still a lot for us to learn from just what we've gone through in the last couple of years. Now that's sort of a meandering answer to where the book's from, but it too is a journey. And we're going through, I think, an interesting journey in Western civilization right now, as we try to understand where we've been and now where we're going. I think COVID taught us more than anything else the need for good thinking, because we couldn't rely on anyone's experience unless you were around in 1919 in the Spanish flu. There was nothing to go on, so you couldn't rely on your experience. You had to be able to think things through. So hopefully that will spur on careful thought and thinking, and hopefully it will also make us realize just how fragile humanity actually is.
One of the things that you've touched on a couple of times is the leaders of managers or managers of managers. And I'm wondering, what are some of the common issues that managers of managers experience that your book addresses?
Well, I think probably first and foremost is that I steal a phrase from a great military commander, Field Marshal Viscount Slim, and he had a comment at the end of the Second World War: "There are no bad regiments, only bad officers." So my variation on that is: there are no bad organizations, only bad managers, because it isn't the organization. The organization takes its lead from management, from the leaders inside the organization. And so the pain that is inside the organization is as a direct result of our leaders not fixing things, for want of a better term. And so that's a common problem. And managers of managers have to get on top of that. Now, sometimes they don't want to hear about the pain because in all likelihood they caused the pain, right? So they'd much rather just keep blind to it. But it's critical because it gets in the way of people being successful. And I know, given your background, you'll appreciate this. In the book, I talk about something that's just sort of coming to the forefront, and that is the nature of sanctuary trauma. So I spend my entire day in this workplace, or I spend my entire energies working for this company. And if there are problems in the company, any of the I have nowhere to go. I have nowhere to get away from it. And so just as we found, particularly in the first responder community, some of the highest issues of trauma reaction and post-traumatic stress are as a result of sanctuary trauma, where I've survived the trauma of the fire or the ambulance call or the police call, and then I go back into a workplace that doesn't care for me. And that's the nature of sanctuary trauma. And I think there's a variation of that will impact all businesses, not just first responders. It will impact all businesses because I've survived COVID and I come back to the workplace and the workplace doesn't care about me. Now that's linking in some of the elements of mental well-being, but I think in the last 10, 15 years, mental well-being has come to the forefront for everyone. It's an important initiative. You mentioned Wounded Warriors. Well, so Wounded Warriors in Canada has been predominantly, well, actually all but in the early cases is about post-traumatic stress disorder. We have as you're probably well aware, we have an extensive healthcare system that takes care of physical injuries, but we didn't have clarity on the mental injuries that were occurring. So the unseen injuries that occurred. And that's the role of Wounded Warriors Canada, was to bring that to the forefront. And now we're not just a charity that goes out and finds things for people. We're actually delivering programs around mental well-being. And it started with veterans and then their families. And then what we found was that there was a tremendous need in the first responder community. So the fire, ambulance, and police services didn't have any of these programs. So a lot of our programs now are directed towards, now it's even further, it's uniformed services. In Canada, our Coast Guard is different than the Coast Guard in the US, but we're now taking into account Coast Guard and correction services. These people that go through trauma day to day, but they have no outlet. And it's important to care for those families because the families are the ones that suffer the most in post-traumatic stress.
How did you get involved with the Wounded Warriors?
It's a great question. I will. I don't think I'll ever forget the first instance where I was introduced to Wounded Warriors Canada and the work that they were doing, and I was asked to go to an offsite that they were having, and they had brought together a group of reservists. So reservists in Canada, a quarter of all deployments into Afghanistan for us were reservists, and they were outside the wire and they were inside the wire. So they were seeing all sorts of things, and listening to the stories from these reservists about how they did 6 months of workup training, they did 6 months deployment, and they went into their basement and they didn't hang out with their buddies, because in most cases, not all their buddies went to Afghanistan with them, very few did. And so they suddenly found themselves kind of trapped and isolated. And so from that point, I went, wow, these guys are really getting to a real-time issue. And then it's just been a matter of time as I learned from there. And then they came to me when I retired from the military and said, well, you've been an ardent supporter, would you join our board? That was a very easy question to answer, because the work that they do day in, day out is saving lives on many different levels. So
Was it through Wounded Warriors Project that you got involved with the Canadian Rangers?
well, the Rangers is another initiative. Again, it comes from my military background. So the Canadian Rangers in certain parts of the country are predominantly First Nations or Aboriginal, and so these are the most operational of anyone in the Canadian Forces. Because they go out and a boat capsizes. The guys are out fishing in a fly-in community way up in the north, and a boat capsizes. They're the guys that go in and help them out, and find them more. There's a snowstorm and someone gets stranded. They're the ones that go out. So they're continually in the field. And one of the facets of the Rangers is there's a junior ranger program. And one of the elements of the junior ranger program is it's about helping to reconnect these young Aboriginal youth with the land and their backgrounds. But in order for these kids to go on in school, they have to be flown out of their community, live in a group home in a city, and be completely disconnected from the land and where they came from. And because our communities, there's no roads into them there, except for maybe an ice road in the middle of winter. So they have to fly in. So part of the work of the Ranger Foundation was to reconnect when they went into these difficult situations, because it makes them youth at risk. So that was the germination of the Ranger Foundation, was to do that. And what has become more so now is making people aware of what the Rangers actually do and the role that they play in these northern communities and these far off, and they go all the way up to the high Arctic, the Rangers themselves. So they're amazing individuals.
So how did you get involved with them?
Well, my job, my last job was I was kind of my leadership role was to keep an eye on the Rangers in Ontario, and so I spent time up north with them, creating a good laugh for them, because minus 50 degrees Celsius weather, and you'd be fully bundled, and they'd be out there in their sweatshirts and all this sort of stuff. Or I'd go off on a snowmobile and fly off into the ditch, and they just go, oh, they just shake their heads and that sort of thing. But my job was to work with them and to help them. And so I realized that we could do more in helping them, and I could do more outside of the military as well. So that was the intent.
You say your last job that you were involved with, and that was through the Canadian Armed Forces?
Yeah, through the Canadian Armed Forces. Yeah, when I was the deputy commander of our Joint Task Force here in Ontario. So that was part of my job.
Many of the things that we were just talking about really points to you not just talking the talk, but you've walked the walk. You've experienced these things. And the one thing that caught my eye was the enlightened leader and the engaged manager.
Right. So the foundation of the enlightened leader is, to me, is this authentic servant and transformational leadership. So exercising those, and it's needed now more than ever. So it is about coming out of the darkness, just like the Enlightenment age, of coming out of the darkness that has overcome us. Because we were all about the task and make as much money as possible and all those sort of things. And then I think so. Certainly, COVID was the start of the shift. Right, because we had to take care of those people, and so leaders had to become more enlightened. They had to be thinking more broadly, and the leaders of leaders need to lead their people to be more enlightened, to be more authentic, to be more servant, to be more transformational. It can't just say it's over to you to do that all on your own. Their managers, their leaders, have to help them to do that. So that's the nature of the enlightened leader. The engaged manager, on the other hand, is the task side of things. So it's about carefully defining the work and the expectations of the work for the individuals. And just as important as defining the work or the accountabilities is, what are the authorities that the individual needs? What are the authorities they need to be able to have over other people's work? Because that's often the struggle. Not all the work goes up and down in the organization. In fact, in most organizations, it goes laterally. So what is the authority that I have over others in order to be able to fulfill the tasks that you've given me? And what is the expectation of my work? So setting context and defining what is the work of the team, and then working on how do I delegate the work so that I'm not telling you how to do it, but I'm telling you what I need you to do. And then monitoring and coaching people to help them through that, all the while continuously improving. Because that's what management really needs to focus on, is continuous improvement. That's the role of management. Only managers can do that. You can't expect your direct reports to continuously improve, because they'll be continuously improving and you won't know what they're up to, right? They need to come back to you and say, this is what I need. This is what needs to be fixed here. Yeah. And we often don't look at continuous improvement through that lens. We see it as big programs and this and that. It's basic fundamental of management that managers practice continuous improvement. They get best advice from their people. So we talk extensively about best advice, which is that honest feedback. And way back to when we were talking about accountability versus responsibility, the nature of best advice is it's an accountability. I hold you to account to give me your best advice. It can't be based on your sense of responsibility, because those with great courage will stand up and say, hey, this is wrong. No, we need to hear from you, and I need to demand best advice from you. By the same token, and this is where the engaged manager and the enlightened leader sort of comes together. If I am inauthentic as a leader, I will not want to hear that best advice, right? I will shy away from that. And I will not accept that, because if I'm not an enlightened leader, I don't see that as I'm helping the organization. I'm being servant and helping you, and I don't see it as being transformational. So the two have to come together, the engaged manager and the enlightened leader. And the mechanism of that truly is this notion of giving your manager your best advice. And when you, as one as one CEO said, he was a CEO of a multinational financial institution. He said, "Those moments of best advice I love, but I hate them because I got to put my tin hat on, because those bullets are coming straight at me, because it's something that I did wrong." But the organization has to have that. And back to our point around, you can't be perfect. It is a journey, and you have to be continually on that journey.
Your company consults with these large corporations and helps them create this environment where what you're talking about can occur. And I feel like what you do is kind of manage a shift in culture. Is that accurate?
It absolutely is. But the shifted culture can't happen if the boss isn't behind it.
Right.
And too often organizations say, well, we want this, but we're not willing to be disciplined and to put it in, because it requires change. Yeah. And understanding that dynamic of change for people. And again, we're back to the manager of managers, or the role of my manager or my leader is to help me through the change, to show me the way through the change. Because naturally human beings do not embrace change. Yeah. We lean on our old way of doing things. That makes us whole. The analogy I draw is, if you're wondering about where did I come up with that, think of the new hire that you've seen in an organization. What do they talk about for the first 18 months? How it was in the old place, because that makes them feel whole. And they hang on to that. And some people are more willing to embrace change, there's no doubt. But we have to understand that there is a natural human reaction that we lean on our old way of doing things, and our managers have to help us with to overcome that.
For those listening that would like to have you come and speak to their organization, or just connect with you, purchase your book, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, there are two avenues through that. The Managerial Leadership Journey.com, which is related to the book. There, I get to show my book, so there you go. As well as forrestandco.com, which is the Forrest Company, the company website, is the best way to get it. It's available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Target.com, all sorts of different venues. But it is the Managerial Leadership Journey is the name of the book.
And for Forrest and Company, what are some of the different programs that you offer to corporations?
Well, we offer, I suppose, our flagship program is a public program that is a year-long leadership journey in and of itself. It's called the Leadership Path. And we take high potential individuals for the first 5 days. So it's 5 days offsite where we really run them through the paces of leadership and understanding how they are perceived inside the organization through 360 feedback, and then through some experiential learning. And then we have a period of coaching over the space of the year, and then we teach them the basics of management. So you're getting both the leadership and the management. But we have after 35 years, we have a lot of different programs, and we tend to build to the needs of the organization. So while we have lots of off-the-shelf stuff, Part of it is understanding the nature of your organization, the nature of your organizational pain, and then determining what is the right hit at the right moment to best help the organization to create a great place to work that delivers the strategy. I mean, that's the fundamental premise of it all. And our clients have been with us, some 20 plus years. Have been clients with us, and some they go through the ups and downs and all that sort of thing. But it really is about what are the needs of the organization. So it isn't necessarily a cookie cutter approach. And then on the effective intelligence piece, we help people to understand their thinking intentions through a profiling system, through effective intelligence, and then how to then make decisions and solve problems. So that's another sort of packaged approach, which has an advantage for the individual, but also for the team. Because the one thing that I have to say about thinking is that it is the ultimate diversity. I have yet to find two people in the same organization after 20 years with exactly the same thinking profile, which means that we all look at the same things, but we process them differently. And so understanding that the core of diversity is in diverse thinking is essential. It's that we are all different, and being able to embrace that diversity of thought is critical for the success of our organizations and critical for the success of the planet, quite frankly. So it's about understanding those. So that sort of gives you a smattering of the types of approaches. But certainly of late, in the post-COVID era, a lot of the work has been around how do you structure the work now? How do you structure the work? How many layers do we need in the organization? How do we interrelate the work across? And that's the management side.
Do you have all these programs outlined on your website?
We do exactly. So it's as well as the Forrest team. So we have 30 plus members of the Forrest team that range with all sorts of experiences, from former CEOs, CFOs, heads of HR, risk experts, you name it. So to be able to assist our clients. And the point is that it's about being able to assist the clients and helping to build the internal capability inside the organization. While we have long-term relationships, the best part of the long-term relationship is seeding those things and letting them nurture and grow on their own inside the organization and being there to help when needed. So that's an important part, and that's a part of our belief system.
Julian, I can't thank you enough for joining me today and walking through your book and telling your story. Thank you for your work with the Wounded Warrior Project, and it's awesome. It was an honor to meet you and to learn from you. So appreciate it.
Well, the honor's all mine, Dave. And I don't think I've ever actually talked this much. I feel rather uncomfortable about not asking you a bunch of questions. So.
Well, now you got to start your own podcast and have me on.
There we go. You're on. And I want to read your book, actually. I want to read that perspective. So tit for tat, as they say.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform, and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.